What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York, calling from the altar again, and this time we are here with Matt of the almighty Crytopsy. So great to finally have Crytopsy here, man. Thank you for coming on today.
Very stoked to be here with you, Alex. How you doing, man?
Doing all right, man. How are you doing today? It's
great. We're getting ready. We're so close. The album's coming up next week. We are going on tour next week, so it's massive hustle time, but we're gonna get there.
Yeah, and it's good, and I cannot wait for it. It's the day after my birthday. You're coming to Brooklyn, so it's going to be a hell of a headbanging celebration. And I'm turning 30, so I need the.
Well, that makes me very happy. We're going to have a good time, Alex.
Yep.
Get ready.
Now that I'm turning 30, it's going to be my first time experiencing a heavy metal show without going in the pit. I'll stand on the side.
Pit retirement coming into effect.
Exactly. But this new album, As Gomorrah Burns, I'm going to say right now is probably the best Crytopsy album ever. That's my initial review of it.
Very, very, very kind of you.
Just the way that it starts from the first track, and the way that it manages to end is absolutely beautiful when you end with Praise the Phil. But for people who haven't heard the full album yet, do you feel like the first singles that we heard so far, such as In Ambiance and Flailed by the Swine, is maybe a good representation of this whole album, or is that just scratching the surface of what's to come?
I feel like it represents the whole album while scratching the surface. Cryptopsy is always a very the sphere of what encompasses Cryptopsy's music is a very wide one. I always picture bands' identities as an umbrella. So In Abeyance really smashes that in-your-face, chaotic, controlled madness that Cryptopsy basically perfected during their second era with Mike DeSalvo on the Whisper Supremacy and Then You'll Beg releases. So it's extremely controlled chaos with some little sprinkles of groove in it. Flayed the Swine falls into the more melodic aspect of the new era of Cryptopsy, as I've been calling this, with a chorus. We have a chorus in a Cryptopsy song, which does not happen very often, something that gets repeated twice, basically the same. You could say copy pasted, but that's not what we did. We recorded them. And then outside of these two spheres of the melodic grooviness of Flayed the Swine and the controlled chaos of In Abeyance, there's a whole bunch of other tracks that are, Praise the Phil as an example, being really dark, very disturbing ending, the long, very melodic, just making you feel sick. Malaise is what I've been saying, calling that outro part of it, which is something completely different for Cryptopsy, which was a goal that we wanted to bring into the new material that we were writing for this record, is to bring a little bit more of uncomfort to the listener's experience outside of it being just chaotic, controlled madness. We wanted to make people feel dirty, and that's what we did. We definitely hit that on that one. The most falling into the chaotic realm again is I have the working title called Fuckatron in my head, Ill Ender.
So that's what that track was originally called, Fuckatron.
It was called Fuckatron because it's a really messed up song. It's really full of traps and falls into that chaotic, controlled madness again. And then the opening track, Lascivious Undivine, which we're getting ready to perform on the tour, which we're very excited about, is also got some of that weird darkness, groove, while being chaotic. So it's the two singles do represent the record, but there's a whole bunch more of stuff going on. Obeisant is a very strange track for Cryptopsy. That whole opening riff with Chris with extremely down-tuned guitar is something that he's never done before. Really brings a weird atmosphere. The last two tracks of the album are extremely different for Cryptopsy while still falling underneath that umbrella.
Yeah, this album is a pure testament that you can't just judge an album by its singles, especially even in this genre. Some people assume death metal is death metal, so therefore, what we see is sort of what we get. But you haven't heard The Righteous Loss. You haven't heard Godless Deceiver, which is my favorite track on the album. So
very cool. So that's actually coming up. It's the next single. It's going to drop on the release date.
Oh hell yeah! I can't. That's a good choice for a single. And there's just so much to be discovered on it. You mentioned too, new era of Crytopsy in a way, and being that this is the first Crytopsy album that we're getting, and quite a while. Is this sort of like, was there sort of a vision in mind? Was it sort of like picking up where you left off after the self-titled record, or being that you released a couple EPs in between then?
No, it's definitely, the self-titled was John's last touch on Cryptopsy, John Lavasseur. He came back after The Unspoken King to, some might say put Cryptopsy back where it's supposed to be, which he accomplished. After he left, the main songwriting fell into Christian Donaldson's hands, our guitarist producer. And he had to work through some issues of feeling competent and comfortable composing for Cryptopsy. And he definitely cut his teeth on the Book of Suffering, Tome 1 and Tome 2. And then from then on, we were touring a lot and spending a lot of time together at that moment, talking about how we wanted the band to continue and what is the legacy of the band that we want to honor and then build upon. And that's what really built upon what became As Gomorrah Burns. So it's really like a launch pad from the Book of Sufferings while leaning into the legacy, while adding that dark malaise as I was talking about before.
Yeah. Because I feel like there's not just one era of Cryptopsy or two eras.
I think there's 4 eras. I've been saying it. There's the first era with Lord Worm, and then there's the Mike DeSalvo era. Then there's the Lord Worm Returns era, and then there's 5 eras. Then there's my first era with The Unspoken King, and then the Return album with John. And then there's the new era, which I've been calling it from the Book of Suffering onwards. Yeah. So it's crazy to think that a band of 30 years has that many eras, and then each of those eras have their own fan bases that either appreciate all the eras or only a specific era, because there's a lot of people that really love that first era with Lord Worm, and then there's another era that just loves that chaotic Mike DeSalvo era. So it's a very interesting thing. Analyzing the Cryptopsy fan bases.
I just got like a vision in my mind where like a pit opens up, or like a wall of death, and you get like multiple fans from each era, and they all do kind of like the Spider-Man meme with each other, or they But it's funny you mentioned that too, because correct me if I'm wrong, but The Unspoken King was actually your first record with the band, right? Or
exactly. Yeah. I came in as a little fresh puppy dog that was not a death metal vocalist, and that was exactly what the band wanted at the time, and I gave them exactly what they wanted. And it was completely not received very positively, as you can go and check on the internet. It was a heavy time, and had I not lived through that and stuck it out, and I've been doing a bunch of these interviews, and people are asking, like, why did you stay? Why didn't you quit? And I don't think I'm a person that quits on things. I put the work in, and I'm finally having fun as a death metal singer.
I mean, you know what? Nobody said that this genre was easy, regardless of how you come into it or not. I think the results are 100% worth it, because I do think that The Unspoken King, the self-titled, and this are extraordinary work. But I did want to ask, because people do want to hear stuff off of None So Vile or Blasphemy Made Flesh or Whisper Supremacy. So like, when you perform some older material, does it maybe resonate with you differently, or does it maybe like channel a different energy into it?
For a while, yes, because I had to figure it out, which is difficult with Lord Worm material because his lyrics are prolific. And when I joined the band, I was like, what the fuck is he saying? Like, it doesn't sound like he's saying any of these words. But I feel like over the past few years, and especially recently, because we're getting ready for a tour, so I'm going back and looking at all the material and making sure that I actually learned the songs properly. I feel like I have like discovered this decipher of Lord Worm's vocals and lyrics, and I'm like, oh, he does say it all. It's just, I feel like I've unlocked something. And performing the tracks, I felt like because of the way the band started with me, my first foray in the band, how I was welcomed into the band was so negative that I was just constantly trying to prove myself. So it was just trying to be the best that I could be as a Lord Worm song, as a Mike DeSalvo song. And then my own songs, it was exactly the same. So I just wanted to prove to the fans that I could do it. So there was a lot of stress and pressure with every track, whether it be my track or someone else's track, and how I would go to perform it. And I realized, unlocking moment of me finally having fun and enjoying myself was MDF when we did None So Vile in its entirety. MDF is such a important festival for extreme metal. A lot of true, with a V instead of a U, metalheads were there, and it worked, and I felt like I was finally welcomed, and it popped. It was a great show, and I think from then on out, I've been having a lot more fun on stage, and especially recently, like over the pandemic, you start to ask yourself, is this ever going to come back at some moment early in the pandemic? Is this it? Is it over? Am I never going to be able to perform again? So I think a balance of all of those things is really just encouraging me to have a good time finally on stage.
This is such an interesting perspective from a death metal musician, because your story is also, like for instance, Derek from Sepultura, still gets the same bullshit.
Always. We're always going to be the new vocalist. Yep. Always.
Corpse Grinder even gets through it too. But you know what? I think in the end, what's so great about death metal, and I'm not trying to discredit death metal vocalists, a lot of people do have their own signature sound. But let's be real. What do you think is harder to replace a vocalist in, a death metal band or a band like Queen? You know what I mean? Like, like I think, I'm not trying to undermine it. It feels like every time a new death metal vocalist comes in, they always tend to rise to the occasion. They don't try to be like the old vocalist. They don't also try to make it their own in a way, like take over in a way. I feel like every death metal musician that comes into a band new manages to provide some type of integrity that pays true to the original stuff.
You have to honor the legacy, and then slowly but surely you can peel away and reveal your own personality. But we're a great lover or hate this band. My friend Elisa I'm newer from the Agonist, Arch Enemy now. She's only now starting to do clean vocals when she's one of the best clean vocalists out there. But she came in, and her first few albums were just honoring the legacy of Angela had built and doing extreme vocals throughout the whole, I think, first 2-3 records. And now finally she's doing some clean vocals and peeling a little bit more of her personality. Much to some people's dismay, but I think it's about time, because she's damn good at it. Why not use the whole full arsenal if it's done in a tasteful way?
I loved her work with the Agonist too. So to see her work with Arch Enemy and bring that in, I heard that she might do a solo career too, which would be awesome as well.
I had her on the podcast, and I poked her about that, and she coyly told me that it's coming, but that was over a year ago. So
fair enough. Hey, she has plenty of time. She's not up to the new Tool album yet. So as a vocalist, though, because I feel like Crytopsy is almost like the thinking man's death metal band in a way, especially with your titles being very thought-provoking. What I love is you could be as gruesome and as vile as in some of your lyrics, but then you could also be like, like Mastodon or Tool level, like conceptual thinking. So has there ever been a time where maybe you had a lyrical idea and that helped dictate the direction of the music, or do you prefer to have music?
No. The band does their own thing, and then when we went into the studio, we wrote this album. We submerged ourselves in a cabin in the woods for a week, right before the pandemic. But basically, as the pandemic was starting to make an impact in the States back in March of 2020, we were in a cabin in the woods. I already had a concept at that point for the whole record, the name of the record. I knew what I wanted it to be about. But I think we had discussed that we wanted the darkness to bring more groove elements, to have parts repeat a little bit more. But the concepts never really dictate where the music is going. It all comes together afterwards, and as it's all bleeding together, as we're both, as the flower is like blooming, we bloom it together.
And do you want, like, Crytopsy's music, could a other person's interpretation of your lyrics, even if it's nothing like what you were saying, could that maybe add another layer of context or meaning to it?
Definitely. So some of my lyrics, we mentioned Godless Deceiver. I'm going to have to release a disclaimer, because if someone reads it without understanding where it's coming from, they're going to think that it's a very harsh song depicted towards a female character. So me having written it from one perspective, knowing that it's based upon a horrible story about something that happened in Brazil, where a woman was wrongly accused of being involved in witchcraft and kidnapping children, and then having a mob of people find her because this very shady news site on Facebook posted a sketch of what this woman looked like, and they found her, of someone that resembled the sketch, and they, as a mob, killed her and just tore her apart to protect their children in their very small community outside of Sao Paulo, Brazil. So me writing the lyrics from a mob mentality, because throughout the whole record, I try to jump into a person's mindset, their educational background, trying to really write from that person's perspective as if they were typing on a blog, because the whole thing's about the internet. It's extremely primitive and very, very aggressive against this female character. So as we discussed with the label setting up this as the next single, they're like, you have to put out a disclaimer because people are going to think that you're encouraging violence against women, which I am definitely not. That's the farthest thing from my personality and who I am. I am a strong advocate of everyone's rights. But it's extremely aggressive, but it's like honoring and then analyzing the relationship of the internet and taking information from the internet and analyzing everything that we're seeing and hearing all the time, because just because you're reading or seeing something doesn't mean it's truthful. And then having a mob mentality, it's very interesting how like a group of people can start to think together and think the same thing based upon something that's not factual. So I think that's something that the song analyzes all of that in an extremely brutal fashion. So
I think it's important that you wrote that song because we're a very reactionary society, and
exactly.
I think that shows the dangers of it. Like showing the dangers of the world, you can't talk about it in a kind way. Like the more brutally honest something is, the more people are aware of it. People aren't gonna, I'm a third generation Holocaust survivor. I wasn't gonna get a feel of what my grandfather went through in the camps if just by sugarcoating the brutality of what they went through.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta watch those documentaries, see the bodies being dumped everywhere. It doesn't make you sadistic. It makes you, it's a way of informing yourself. So, learning should never be, I've always said the most important lessons are never clean. So
that is very truthful, and that's what I try to get across with the whole record, specifically that song. And when the label chose it, I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna definitely have to explain myself a little bit, because people could take it the wrong way, and that's definitely not what the intention of the song was. So I basically need to give an explanation before you listen to the song, or at least read the lyric videos, especially because it's a lyric video, so it's very clearly written what I'm saying.
They need to make they need to start making disclaimers just like tracks in an album. Like before, every song, just warning, you will not like this song, but you know what? I don't give a fuck.
You may be triggered.
Yeah. I do need to ask this. We'll get this question out of the way, but I know you weren't on this album, Blasphemy Made Flesh, but next year is going to mark 30 years of the debut of that album. Could we be expecting some sort of celebration in the Crytopsy camp as a result?
Well, we're doing MDF in May, and we're playing it from front to back. There's been discussions of continuing that while promoting the new material. So it's in the works. I think it's a seminal album. It's got some banger tracks that we played throughout my whole career. So we're definitely going to have some fun with that. Blasphemy. There's no Blasphemy on the set coming up because of that. We are honoring Ungentle Exhumation, which is also celebrating its 30th anniversary this year in 2023. So we're going to be playing Back to the Worms. It's a fun, very fun track, very primitive and fun, cool track. I'm excited to do that. But we're definitely very, very keen and aware that each era of Cryptopsy is important to the legacy of the band. So when anniversaries come up, we're gonna honor them, and while continuing to evolve in this new era that we're in.
Yeah. And circling back to the lyrics as well, because you have all these different concepts and stories that you address, does your personal life or your personal experiences also play a subject matter, or is Cryptopsy meant to be more of an escapism?
It's more of an escapism, 100%. I definitely try to embody characters all the time when I'm writing. I find horrible things typically and use them as a creative writing experiment. and then drop myself into the characters, either as a victim or someone that's causing the malice. And I just try to put myself into that person's skin and write from their perspective and write from their educational background. So some of the, like Flayed the Swine is a very simple lyric song, very aggressive, which I'm not. Same thing with Godless Deceiver, and I have Fuckatron in my head again. Illender, just brutal lyrics, written from a very creative standpoint, very far from who I am as a person.
But the famous saying from the painter Henry Matisse, every painting is a self-portrait in a way. So I'd imagine that maybe as you explore and evolve as an artist, that maybe it resonates with you in a different way. Maybe some of the stuff, the external subject matter, could serve as like a metaphor in a way for.
Hypothetically, I'd have to peel back the layers of the onion to think about that. I'm too in the heat of it with the album coming out next week and with the tour coming up. It's just a focused, analyzed, making sure all the I's are dots and T's are crossed at this exact moment for me to peel back the layers of that.
Fair enough. And I have a few more questions for you, but kind of like the inspiration in a way. You mentioned, like this whole story of, the mob mentality in Brazil and all this. There's clearly like a lot of research involved, but I've always said that like subject matter that you sing about isn't necessarily the same thing as quote unquote inspiration in a way, where like, the creative energy and, that impulse and that urge to just create and put pen to paper. So is inspiration itself, that creative energy, can you really seek that out? Can that be found the way that you find like lyrical subject matter, or does that just have to strike you?
I think that's to strike you, and it has to. I work really well with deadlines, so I knew that I was going into the studio, and Chris wanted some skeleton ghost tracks of my ideas and patterns. So I had to write lyrics, so I did. But I think you can train yourself to be creative, and something that I'm trying to do with my household, where we wake up and we write something for 30 minutes as a group. And I think through that you may find inspiration, but you got to put the work in. It's not something. Sometimes it's like a lightning strike and an idea comes, but most of the time it's work. You got to work at it.
Fair enough. And I mean, you're also in the podcast realm. You're on the dark side like myself. So I'd imagine with the guests that you've spoken to as well, you hear plenty of stories. And, because I think one thing that's so great about every musician I've interviewed, whether they were playing in the 70s or their band is just starting now, it's like, it seems like everybody's adventure is unique. So
Totally. And the reasons they're there are different, and why they continue is different. The podcast has really given me just so much confidence speaking, first off, and my ability to just sit down and connect with anyone is through the roof times a million compared to before I started the podcast. And my organizational skills, my confidence communicating with people, whether it be also via email, has really stepped up, and just finding a way to stay very, very, very organized has really stepped up a lot. And I'm taking on a lot more roles in the band, which makes me happy and confident, and the band trusts me. And it's a whole new ball game since the podcast. I'm very, very excited.
Yeah, and
what the podcast brought me.
I love what, from Joss's podcast to Doc Coyle's podcast to Rob Flynn's
totally
podcast.
Inspired me.
When I interviewed Jamie Josta, I basically said, because his podcast is what kind of inspired me to start my own.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah, and I was just like, you're ready to see the legacy of what you've done? So
I gave him a sandwich.
He told me I could give him a sandwich.
Yeah, I gave him I made him a sandwich, and I presented it to him on Zoom.
Really?
I did.
I thought he was just joking when he.
No, because he always says that, when you rip something off, or not really, you're inspired by something, you say you owe them a sandwich, one of his things. So.
Oh wow! Well, That's good to know. Next time I see him, I gotta take a trip to the next deli for him.
Exactly.
But when you are looking up lyrical subject matter of tragedy and darkness and just every vile aspect, even death metal musicians, and I don't buy it for a second when like they say we're the same people off stage as we are on stage. Like we all have the desire to be happy. It's human instinct. But when the negative aspects of humanity is a source of inspiration, I can't even turn on the news for 2 minutes without feeling like I'm getting an aneurysm. So like, do you feel that like when you're researching the darkest aspects of man, that makes the songwriting process just as deteriorating as it can be cathartic?
I think I've found a way to sort of like put up a veil when I'm researching, and I look at it really from like an analytical, almost academic approach, where it's like I'm looking for something that will spark something, and I look at it almost as if, which is horrible to say, like as if it's not real. So that's definitely helps me not become too in the vicious cycle of negativity and finding myself becoming too depressed from something or taken aback. I don't watch the news. My wife keeps me up to date with what's going on. My whole face, well, there's I'm in Canada now, so there's no more news on meta platforms. But before that, all my whole feed was never news. It was just metal and craft beer. It's like they know what I like. But I live through I like to focus on things that make me feel positive, and my wife keeps me up to date with the things I should really be paying attention to.
Wow, that's very nice of your wife. You make her watch all that bullshit.
She likes to keep up to date on that stuff. So yeah, we each have our own things that we need to do.
That's cool. And how do you know when you're finished with a song?
Christian Donaldson. He's the complete control of the Cryptopsy ship. He's got A to Z. I also, if you've ever read some of my lyrics, there's typically like a closing point. So I like to find like a weird twist, like an M. Night, that director guy, the Sixth Sense director guy, where the song has like a little twist at the end, and I like to sort of include those in each track. For some reason, I feel like once I hit that, then I feel like it's finished.
Fair enough. That was a very good technical answer right there. And the final question I wanted to ask you is I've had the privilege of seeing Crytopsy live countless times, but the last time I saw Crytopsy, I believe, was when you played Knitting Factory with Aborted.
I remember that show.
Yep. And the first time I saw Crytopsy was the Cannibal Corpse Obituary Abysmal. I think that was Decibel Tour in 2016.
That was Irving Plaza. That was great too.
Yep. I'm so glad I live just 10 minutes from there. 10-minute walk. But
that was a good night too.
Yeah, that was a hell of a night, and one of the most violent pits I've ever been in. But is there a similar energy that you channel into your live presence as you do when you're songwriting, or is it a completely separate form of self-expression that like you playing live and being a writer are two separate things?
I think it's two separate things. I think that live is a portrayal of the way you look and act and sound, whereas when you're writing and recording is just the way you sound. So I do write with the mindset of, can I pull this off live? I think that's very important because I don't like faking anything. But it's definitely very separate. I feel like the energies are different. It's really a much more cocooned, personal experience writing and recording versus performing. When you're performing, it's more of an outward expression of energy, and recording is much more internal.
Can you practice stage presence and crowd interaction though? Is that really something you could rehearse?
I do. I do. I'm getting older, so my neck needs to be prepared for a tour, and that's what the next week is all about, because I don't want to have the worst hangovers. And when we hang out and party on your birthday, I don't want to bang over because it's early on the tour.
Yeah, hell yeah, that's gonna be awesome. And so get in your daily dose of windmills.
I got to start. We're about a week out, so it's about time that I start doing that on top of the vocal training that I have been doing for months.
Yeah, I want to see you compete with Corpse Grinder in the windmill.
I think he's got it somehow. He's a legend. He's got it. I did measure my neck when I did Aborted, before the Aborted that you saw me on. and my neck grew by, I can't remember, it was about 2 inches from the beginning of the tour to the end of the tour. And I have footage of that somewhere.
Wow, the great necks of death metal.
Mine's definitely out of shape. I got to get back in shape for the tour.
Yeah.
This was great. This was great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Anytime, man. Thank you, man. Everybody, is there just anything else with Crytopsy you'd like to promote with the release of As Gomorrah Burns?
Come the As Gomorrah Burns drops September 8th. The Carnival of Death tour starts the day before that. We're going all across the States, popping up into Canada for some shows. We are going to Asia in December, 10 shows across Asia. It's going to be good to be back there. That was the last tour we did in 2019. And we are working on a whole bunch of more stuff for the next year coming, and we can't wait to finally be back on the road.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Matt of Crytopsy, As Gomorrah Burns, out via Nuclear Blast September 8th. Be sure to pick that up. We will see you next summer on Heavy New York.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much.